In Amsterdam, I dreamt I saw my mother again. Same beautiful pale blue eyes.
This is the one I was talking about.
When I lost her, I lost sight of any landmark that might have led me someplace happier.
You're the boy, aren't you? The boy whose mother was killed.
Today we'll be talking with Roger Deakins, one of Hollywood's most respected cinematographers, who we visited here in Los Angeles to talk about his work on The Goldfinch. Director John Crowley's drama is based on the 2013 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel of the same name that follows protagonist Theo, who survived a terrorist attack at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art when he was 13. Oakes Fegley plays the young Theo, and Ansel Elgort plays the character as an adult. The movie was made on sets and on locations, largely in New York. Deakins famously won an Oscar for Blade Runner 2049 after 13 previous nominations for films including The Shawshank Redemption, The Man Who Wasn't There, No Country for Old Men, Fargo, and Skyfall. And I'm thrilled that he's joining us today. I'm Carolyn Jardina. Welcome to the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen. Roger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, yeah.
So to start, what attracted you to the material? Had you already read the novel?
No, I hadn't actually. I can't remember. It was so long ago, but it was sometime while we were actually in Budapest doing Blade Runner. I think my agent mentioned it to James and sent us a copy of the novel, not the script. And, I was immediately kind of drawn by it, yeah.
And then this was your first time working with director John Crowley.
Yeah.
What did you talk about when you first met?
When I first met, there was nothing specific like that. We just sort of talked in general about this, that, and the other. You tend to get to know somebody, really, not to talk in specifics. I had seen one of his first films, Boy A, was really impressed by that. And obviously Brooklyn. So we talked about that and different approaches and things we've each done, in our kind of lives, really. So, yeah, we didn't, not initially, we didn't really talk that much about Goldfinch, not in terms of, the photography of it. That's sort of something that just kind of develops as you go along, really. Did in that case, anyway.
And what was he like to work with?
Oh, just perfect, great, wonderful, lovely guy, really committed to the project and committed to his own version of it, which is really nice. Had a very distinct kind of idea what he wanted out of it, but it wasn't dogmatic. And it was great. It was great collaboration, it was great to and forth, Yeah, he was a really nice guy. I had a really good time.
Well, what would you sum up the creative brief that the two of you went for?
There's rarely anything specific like that when you're talking with the director and talking through a script. It's something that sort of develops as I like to go through a script with a director and talk about different scenes and the different kind of feel of each scene, what each scene means more than actually what it should visually look like, because then that sort of develops out of that conversation. And then you gradually look at locations and, it's something that evolves, really.
Now, you shot on location in New York and Amsterdam.
New York, Amsterdam, and in Albuquerque. Albuquerque standing in for Las Vegas, yeah.
Okay, and then you also did some work on stages as well.
A little bit in a warehouse up in Yonkers, yeah. Not really a proper stage, but it was fine for what we needed.
Well, let's start with New York. When you were shooting the New York scenes, what was the feel you wanted to give, both when Theo was living on the Upper East Side and then the time he spent in the antique store?
I mean, we wanted a feeling of this sort of darkness of this old New York apartment, that kind of feeling of fading wealth, I suppose, is what I was looking at anyway. And the antique store wanted to become somewhere that was more inviting to Theo, became something kind of more warm and something more where he felt safe, really. it was more about specific scenes, really. When his father turns up in the apartment, they wanted to feel get kind of threatening. So there's certain ways we tried to achieve that in the shots, what you saw and what you didn't see, When Theo first goes to the apartment, for instance, he's taken there by the welfare, social services or whatever. Apart from the conversation, we had him sitting in the passageway, so he's listening to the conversation off, so we tried to keep it about Theo and keep quite a lot of it in his perspective. So it wasn't always like showing everything, it was kind of subtle things like that, really.
Could you elaborate on your approach to the lighting? Again, for the New York scenes.
Well, the interesting thing about choice of locations is that, as I say, the kind of look of it kind of evolves as you think about the location and look at the practical issues of doing it. So we looked at locations which were kind of real apartments on whatever it was meant to be, Fifth Avenue or Park Lane, I can't remember. But they were always like 4th or 5th floor on those tiny elevators, and it's like a nonsense. You're not going to shoot there for sort of 4 or 5 weeks and get a full day's work. It's just not going to happen. And then the time of year we're shooting at means the sort of daylight time is limited. So you're going to have to light it. So going from actually using a real location, we went in the real apartment location, we went and we shot it in a house upstate near Rye. And it was mostly ground floor or second floor, and, KK designer made it look like an apartment. And that way I had total control over the lighting, and wanted a kind of feeling of the sort of soft light, wanted a feeling that it was quite down inside, it wasn't kind of an attractive place. It was kind of a little threatening, I suppose. So that gave us control over that location, but we couldn't see outside the windows. And one of the first things was, surely we want to see outside the windows, but really you don't, because a lot of the time the curtains are almost closed. So there's like just slivers of light getting into the place, Whereas some of the other locations, which initially KK and production had thought about doing it on a set, when I came on board and talked it with John, we said, no, we should do this on location. Like the Amsterdam hotel room, for instance, originally was going to be a set shot in New York with a backing. And we said, well, no, surely it's so important that we have a window and we have a view and you see Amsterdam. And it's about these moments with Theo. There's not much dialogue, it's just about him. And it's a much more internal thing, but that made it more important. You felt the view and you felt the change in light. You felt the daylight going, the night coming, the snow falling. So it's interesting how, as you gradually develop how you're going to shoot something, things change. Like I say, one goes from a location to a stage set and the other goes the other way.
And then the scene in the antique store. Was the antique store a set or is that a location?
No, that was a location, yeah. Again, that sort of was interesting because it changed from being something that was written as, and the first location we all looked at was a sort of semi-basement kind of idea where you go downstairs, a sort of exterior well going downstairs to this antique store, which was below the pavement level. But that seemed very restrictive to me, and I really felt I wanted the kind of feeling for the scenes when you're in the antique store of actually looking out the window and seeing the street and be able to see Theo standing on the street from inside the antique store when he first arrives and things like that. So that sort of changed around, and it was just funny. One day we were driving around in the van, as you do as a group, location scouting, and I said, about the antique store, we were passing a restaurant that I'd walked by like the day before or the weekend before or something. I said, has anybody thought about that restaurant? And KK said, I think it was KK, said, yeah, we looked at that one time. Maybe it's possible, but we dismissed it. And I said, should we look at it again? Because I thought it was really good. So we went back and looked at that. I don't know if we had lunch there or something, and just actually sort of took it in. And that's how we chose that place, turned the restaurant into an antique store, yeah.
And how did you light that location?
I didn't really light it. I lit it, but I lit it with the practicals that were part of the interior of the store. That whole location was split up because the actual shop was in one place on the street in New York. the basement of the antique store we had to build as a set in this warehouse in Yonkers. And then the upstairs, which is Hobie's private apartments, was a small townhouse in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So it was a real mix of things to get the right look of the overall composite place,
So for the scenes in Amsterdam, now he's an adult and he's in a very different place in his life. Would you elaborate on the feel that you wanted to create for those hotel scenes?
Most important, the time passing, really, because you had to get across that he was struggling with himself for quite a long time, and then he wakes up in the middle of the night and has this vision of his mother, and, but that's all interspersed, isn't it, between the beginning and the end of the story.
And then at one point in the story, he goes to live in the hot desert of Nevada with his father, which you said was Albuquerque, but again, very different look. Would you talk about your approach to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seemed to make sense to go to Albuquerque because, well, frankly, in New Mexico, you get a good tax break. There's a good crew infrastructure there. And we wanted a kind of suburban look that is equally well in Albuquerque as it is in Las Vegas. They're quite similar. Yeah, there's a very particular part of Albuquerque, there's a new sort of expansion up to the west side, which looks right out into sort of empty desert, and that was kind of perfect for us. So we scouted a number of houses there, and John ended up liking the interior of one particular house and the exterior of another. And then we scouted around for Boris's house and found this fantastic place that looked out onto nothing with a swimming pool, a dry swimming pool in the back, which was perfect for the scene with the two boys. The only thing we had to do to it, behind the swimming pool, there's like a little garden and there's a wall and there's empty nothing into the, just flat desert or whatever. And the only thing he had to do, I asked him to take some of the trees. There was a couple of little apple trees or something in the garden. I said, well, here, let's remove those because it's even bleaker if you take them away. So it wasn't much to do there. That was really good. But, I mean, it was really about finding the right location. I mean, it wasn't a huge budget film, so you couldn't do a lot. We couldn't build a lot. It was often about finding the location that really fitted the story.
But you really felt the bleakness, the heat, the isolation.
Yeah, it was really important for me that, New York was kind of a soft light, kind of natural, kind of soft light thing. And then you go to Las Vegas, Albuquerque, where we were, and I really wanted to shoot in hard light, and actually top sunlight was fine. I didn't want to shoot in, low golden sun. There's one scene in low sunlight, but most of it was deliberately in hot, high sun.
The Museum of Modern Art was a set build, correct?
Yeah, obviously exterior is the real thing, but yeah, we built a set, yeah.
And then you had to have the bombing sequence. Would you talk about that shoot?
Yeah, I mean, that was, well, it was tricky, I suppose, but John was really keen on the aftermath of the bombing to be like this void. He just wanted a kind of complete emptiness of Theo's kind of getting up amongst the rubble. John didn't want to know where we were. He didn't want Theo to know where he was, just this sort of void. And I'd done a few things like that, not on Jarhead and a bit on Blade Runner as well. So it was kind of, okay, so the thing to do is you just filled the warehouse with smoke, basically, just as thick as we could go. I mean, we couldn't get enough smoke, really. Just kept pumping it in till you couldn't see anything. Because the problem was, the set is not huge because it wouldn't have looked real for the last scene in the film where they're walking around the real museum before it blows up. So we had to knock out the background with atmosphere, so it had to be really thick to take it out at that distance away,
Was it mostly practical effects in that scene?
Oh, yeah, it was all practical. It wasn't very nice, actually, but yes.
Before the bomb, these are scenes when he's with his mother.
Yeah.
He has a sense of safety. Would you describe how you lit the earlier scenes before the bombing?
Well, it's the same, really. It's the same lighting. I just basically recreated the lighting that's at the real place, but I used it with sky panels, LED sky panels, so I could change the color, subtly change the color, but also control over, they're basically big panels. I think they're about 90 sky panels in big blocks. But that gave me the option to have the far end of the block brighter than the near end, so I could sort of grade the light in a way. Especially for the aftermath, I needed to have stronger light at the back, so the characters were slightly silhouetted against atmosphere that was kind of blown out, So basically I had to do one lighting setup that suited both those situations, really. But I say just based on the real thing. What I didn't do, which they have at the Met, is the little spotlights on the paintings, which it always bugs me when I go to the Met, because you've got a daylight source, or I don't know if it's tubes or daylight. I think it's tubes, but they're daylight. And then they've got these little tungsten spotlights on the paintings. And, well, I mean, that's two vastly different coloured light on a painting that you're supposed... I don't understand that. It's really cheesy. But anyway, so I didn't do that. I just used this big overhead soft light.
For you, what scene was the most challenging creatively, and would you describe why?
The challenging thing, I think, creatively is actually not a scene-to-scene thing. It's more the overall kind of texture of the film. That you're shooting scenes that butt together, but they're weeks apart in the schedule, and you've got to get a continuity and a flow to a visual sort of flow. So it feels like you're watching the same film. And then you go from, in this case, city to city, and you kind of want to bring the changes, but you still want to be at the same movie. You don't want it to sort of jump. So I think it's successful in that way, that the whole thing seems to hang together visually and emotionally as one piece, I think that's the challenge. Individual scenes, obviously... You're doing the two kids, take acid or whatever it is on the swings, and when they're outside Vegas, and the dust comes down and they stagger back to the apartment or the house, that's kind of a challenge, because you don't have much time to do those kind of dust shots. You maybe get one evening to do it in the schedule, otherwise you don't know where you're going to do it. You know what I mean? It's not like a huge production. So it's kind of, we got that. And that's a bit of a high when you get something like that. But, that's just a logistics thing, really.
Was there a technical challenge that was more pronounced than the others?
Actually, the hardest challenge was shooting the exterior of the Met on a Sunday morning.
Oh, no.
And we go there. Yeah, you can only shoot there up till I think it's 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Maybe it's 10 o'clock, but it's no later than that. So you get there in the morning when it's dark, and you set everything up. You set your ambulances up and all the people and the rain towers and all this. And then you realize there's not a cloud in the sky, and it's meant to be a rainy day. So then you figure, well, we've got to shoot this before 8:15, before the sun comes over those buildings on whatever it is, Fifth Avenue or whatever it is. And that's the biggest technical challenge, because you go then, John, we could be in trouble here with the sun. We've got to do this real quick. But that's hard, because it's really got to feel right. And you've got Oakes is kind of coming out, and he's got to be, all the extras have got covered in dust and look like they've just been bombed. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do in a few hours. So I think it was quite successful given that kind of pressure, you know what I mean?
What time of year were you shooting in New York?
That must have been in March, I think. So there wasn't a lot of daylight. We couldn't start that early. I remember it didn't really get light till, 6 or 7. So we didn't have a lot of time to shoot those shots. And it was not so much shooting the shots as setting all the background and getting the action right and getting the feel of that one little moment. It's not many shots in the film, but it's a very important little moment, And
you shot this with an Alexa. Would you discuss your lens choices?
Just normal. I mean, the only thing we did differently on it was we did some very shallow depth of field shots for the pre-explosion. So that, because these things John wanted to use interspersed within the film in different places, you know, just Theo's memory of that moment when his mother left him and the explosion. And obviously we couldn't, and we didn't want to do a kind of big, you know, effects thing, you know, it's not a Marvel comic movie. So we wanted to kind of concentrate on Theo's perception, a memory of that moment, and those little details, you know, the mother's hand leaving his shoulder and the mother walking off out of focus and stuff like that. So we did quite a lot of tests on that and shot that a really, really shallow depth of field. So we had this slightly, you know, this very rapidly out of focus image, you know. I mean, it wasn't any different lens choice, really. It was just a matter of shooting really wide open and sometimes pulling focus forward when you would naturally drop focus back. So when the mother walks away, we would actually pull focus forward so she was going more out of focus rather than coming, you know what I mean? But I mean, we never really went longer than a 65 on that. It wasn't something that I wanted to do on long lenses. I mean, I was basically shooting in that sort of mid-range, you know, 32, 35, 40, 50. That it's quite a straightforward film, you know, photographically. It's really about each little scene. It's the little things that are important. It's such a personal story and so intimate and so much about this one character. So things about his face and about his point of view. And as I say, it's those little details. It's like little things we did, like in the house in Las Vegas, as a kid, he's curled up on the floor. And later you go to the hotel room in Amsterdam, and this is James's idea. Theo's curled up, there's an adult, he's curled up on the floor in the same way. It's that kind of little moments of torment that kind of I thought were quite magical. And that's what it was about, more than the sort of larger kind of challenges. It was about just those little things, the little details, you know.
Would you tell us about working with the actors?
Well, the other thing, I mean, it was a great cast. I mean, it's a totally wonderful cast to work with, especially Oakes. You know, I mean, I don't think I've ever worked with an actor who's so focused on the character and had such an understanding of what his character was going through. It was kind of amazing. I mean, I would listen to his conversations with John about why he was doing something in a certain way. It was really interesting. He really thought about it, and he really was that character. It was really great. Yeah, it's brilliant. And then it was interesting to see Ansel take what Oakes was doing, both swap their little mannerisms to try and integrate the character from one age to another. That was really interesting. You know, I said the sort of subtle things they were doing, all the actors. Yeah, that's what makes a film like that so special, you know, just the details of the characterizations, you know. So I say it's for me, photographically, I was partly why I operate. I mean, I just love being there watching those little things happen. Actors do these subtle little expressions or the little moments they do to explore their characters. It's really interesting.
We also know that The Irishman is coming up where they're actually going to have the same actor but using de-aging techniques. Do you think that's something that will start to be used more frequently in Hollywood?
Look, it's been happening for years. You know, I work in animation. I still work in a bit on animation. I'm sort of consulting a bit on a film at Sony at the moment called Viva. And the two disciplines I've said to you before, they're getting more and more combined, aren't they? So you watch, you know, whatever, The Lion King or Jungle Book or whatever, it's all these. But there's something that's still special about doing it in camera. So, yeah, there's certain circumstances where you need to make somebody look young or older. And, yeah, the digital technology is great for being able to do that. But I think it depends on the balance in it. How much do you use it? It's like, how much do you put in a totally CG background? I mean, I think it's death, personally. You know, that's why on Blade Runner and the last film I just worked on, most of the world is real. that CG is the background. It's way deep in the background, or it's very certain elements that you couldn't do any other way, or wide flying shots of the city you couldn't do, obviously, live. But even then, we tried to do as much as possible on Blade Runner live, and I think it makes a difference. But maybe I'm old-fashioned, I don't know. I mean, Connie always used to talk about happy accidents, but it's that unknown, that intangible thing. It's like the difference between shooting on a real location and shooting on a set. I mean, for all your kind of talent and ability, I couldn't light what I'm looking at now. That window, the way the sunlight's kicking off the floor and bouncing through here. And I mean, you just can't do it on a set. You can't get that level of detail and naturalism, that complexity of what the light's doing. Yeah, you can get close enough, an audience isn't going to think about it probably, but it's still not the same. The other thing where it's really telling, I think, is the actor's position in it. And it's all about the actors. It's not about me and the camera and the frame and the lighting, and that's all just something else. If you haven't got the actor and you don't believe the actor, if you don't believe Oakes is Theo, you haven't got a film. And that's why it's so brilliant, because you really believe this kid is that character. It's fantastic. And if he was acting in a blue screen and you put in Las Vegas as a CG background, would he be the same? I don't think he would, because I don't think he'd be relating to his environment, and that's the problem with so many, I better not get specific, but supposedly big movies where they do so much as a CG environment, you don't feel the character relating to that background. There's some mismatch there. It's just not the same.
You mentioned happy accidents. Is there a happy accident that comes to mind from Goldfinch?
No, only that I'm really lucky with the weather. I'm always so lucky with the weather. I mean, the last film I did, I needed cloud for like 3 months, and we got it just about every day. I mean, I'm so lucky. No, just those scenes in Albuquerque for Las Vegas, to get the clear skies at the twilight. And, you don't always get that. But yeah, I'm just very lucky with the weather, really.
Would you like to give a shout out to your crew?
Absolutely. I mean, again, well, the thing is, you work on a film like that, it's like very small locations. You're going from place to place quite quickly. You've got to move all your equipment in, up a few floors, get in, set up, and then get out and go somewhere the next day. So it's really tough for a crew. And I was working with people I worked with for years, apart from Steve Ramsey, who was the gaffer who I hadn't worked with before, who was really quite brilliant. Well, Mitch Lillian I've worked with since Fargo. I've done just about every film I've done in America with Mitch. He's just, he's the best. So that was the first film I'd done actually without my regular dolly grip, because he's retired, which was quite a blow. Bruce Hammy, which you probably met. You met Bruce, I think, yeah. Well, he retired after they did Coen Brothers movie, and so I was working with a new dolly grip, Rick Maricombe, who I've worked with millions of times before, but he was brilliant. And obviously Andy Harris I've worked with since Fargo, so that's quite a long time. Was my first assistant. Connie Chung was my second. She's pretty brilliant. Great. Yeah, no, it's a great crew. And
then you again worked with eFilm on your workflow.
eFilm, yeah. Josh Golish was my DIT. eFilm did the dailies, yeah.
This is a year when the American Society of Cinematographers is celebrating their centennial, and I know there's been a lot of talk about, discussions about which cinematographers have influenced each of you over the years. Who have been some of your influences?
Well, Conrad Hall is American, for sure. Ozzie Morris, Keizu Miyagawa, Vadim Yusuf. I mean, I don't know. You mentioned that there's millions. Raoul Couchard. I don't know. There's millions. But of the American cinematographers, I think Connie Hall and Haskell and the Fieldmaster, all those guys. But Connie I got to know quite well, and I think he was the biggest influence, because I remember watching Fat City, which was like, I think 1975. I remember watching that in Torquay in South Devon on a rainy winter's day. Totally empty cinema, apart from a couple of people that were in there because I think they were homeless. And just being blown away. I mean, I knew his work, but I hadn't seen that film. I'd just been blown away. And then that many years later to be, having dinner with Conrad and just chewing the fat about filmmaking was just like, wow, It's great. He was the greatest influence on me, really.
And what do you think of the work that's coming out of Hollywood today and your cinematography community?
I think the cinematography is like, worldwide, it's pretty stunning. It's pretty amazing what people are doing. It's just a pity some of the films have been made are not up to it, frankly. That's why it's such a pleasure to work on something like Goldfinch. I mean, even if I hadn't worked on it, I'd have been glad it was being made, because there's so few, dramas being made with interesting stories that actually have something to say and emotionally are engaging. And so I say, even if I hadn't worked on it, I would have been pleased that Goldfinch would have been made. But actually, to have been able to work on it as well was like, it's pretty great. I've been very lucky.
It's a beautiful film. Congratulations.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.